You know, when it's on the same log as the Cold Steel Raha 2 or even its older cousin, the Zero Tolerance 0200, the 0350 seems diminutively small, almost like a first-year kid in middle school, which I think is fitting because, especially when it comes to intended usage, the 0350 seems to have a crisis of identity. In fact, it's inspired me to make another video here in the near future about how we shouldn't necessarily blur the lines between a hard use folder and a tactical defensive folder. However, we do see this knife with the increasingly familiar billing of being a hard use, utilitarian, tactical tool that could really save your life, or maybe just cut open some boxes if that's more your bag. I think you guys know what I'm talking about, these knives that are relatively small. Obviously this is a folding knife that we have here, and I would say that any knife that you actually want to use for hard use or a tactical knife, if you go to a folding knife, you're already making a significant compromise. Alas, like I already said, that's a topic for another video that I want to make. So the intended usage for this knife falls right in there. It is a small, defensive, hard use folder. Priced at about $140 on Blade HQ, a little bit less if you're willing to look other places, $108 on eBay. I always try to toss in that Blade HQ price because I spend a lot of my time shopping on there. Feel like I need to shout them out. They're a really good resource for us knife collectors to have. The blade profile on this bad boy is a recurve, and you guys know I love my recurves. However, they do present a unique mixture of benefits and drawbacks. I think that they provide a whole lot of extra belly and curved surface, and they give you a whole lot of cutting power and bite in your cut. However, they are very difficult to sharpen for a lot of people, myself included, just because you need to keep your cutting edge at the same angle with your sharpening media throughout the entire swipe, and that's much more difficult on a recurve than on, say, a clip point blade. However, I enjoy them, and I've found that I can typically sharpen them between the Wicked Edge and the Sharpmaker. I do okay. If you have a system that provides for curved stones like a Lansky, or if you shelled out the extra cash for Wicked Edge curved stones, I think you'll do just fine. Since it's a recurve, we have plenty of belly. I don't think it will be a problem. I think you'll get relatively even wear across this blade during utility use. I tend to dull out this point right here disproportionately quickly on a recurve, and funnily enough, that part of the blade is a major pain in the ass to sharpen for one reason or another. The tip is pretty stout on this thing. I don't think breakage is going to be an issue in any of that hard use that we're all going to be doing with our 3.25-inch blade, but I think you're going to compromise some tip cutting with it as well. The steel is S30V, which a lot of people hail as their favorite steel, and I've always had an interesting relationship with. The sharpening processes that I can make work with damn near every other steel just don't work so good for S30V. By the time I've got it polished down to a nice edge, I take away a lot of its cutting aggression. I don't know what I need to do about that, if I should just stop my polishing at 400 or 600 grit, but by the time I've got it down to 1000, it's slicing but not really aggressively. Similarly, I find that it wears to sort of a duller wedge relatively quickly. That being said, it is a premium steel. It holds an edge much longer than AUS 8, 8CR13 MOV, those sorts of real budget-oriented steels. I think you will see an increased performance when you go up to S30V. That being said, however, when we go over to grind, first I'll just talk about the major blade grind. It is a very mellow, hollow grind. You might mistake it for a flat grind if you were not looking closely. It's certainly not very drastic. However, there is quite a bit too much steel behind the edge. I've heard interviews with Zero Tolerance about how this makes it a better utilitarian edge for people in the field, and frankly, I think it's bullshit. With a nice steel, you can have a hair-popping edge that you can maintain back really quickly with a strop. If all you've got is a Sharpmaker out there in the field, whatever, we have to get rid of that myth of a soldier taking a rock in the field in Afghanistan or Iraq and going whap, 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 whap. Okay, now I can cut through, I don't know, tank cannons again. I just don't get it. Either you're abusing the edge and you're really pitting the hell out of it, breaking off fragments, or you're just wearing the edge, opening things like MREs, in which case you don't need to sharpen with a stone, you need to strop on leather. So I don't understand that whole argument of a lot of steel behind the edge and having a really soft steel like Emerson does. I don't think that whole thing helps. I think that's only harmful. But hey, that's just me. I've never been deployed. I'm not enlisted in an armed service. So, you know, there you go. Our deployment comes chiefly from our flipper here. But we do have thumb studs as well. You see they double there as the blade stops, but they are pretty well occluded. You can get to them pretty comfortably. It's not a problem if you're a more traditional guy that likes those thumb studs over a flipper. You may use them. And you guys can hear and see we have the Kershaw Zero Tolerance Ken Onion Speed Safe Spring Assist, which works pretty dang well on this knife. I will still hold up the Kershaw Clash as being the best example of a really snappy, authoritative opening with the Speed Safe design, and I just really love this blade. By the way, I love that comparison. I love how many recurves I'm getting to. I think there will have to be some Instagram pictures of that. But there's our deployment. We have Speed Safe, 2 real opening methods. Because of the added in-handle retention of the Speed Safe, I don't think you're going to want to be doing too much flipping. You might be able to, if you really ripped it. There, I just did one off camera, I swear. But I don't think that's going to be as practical as just, I mean, you barely have to get that thing moving and it comes out of the handle. Doesn't rocket out like on the Clash. I'm just going to keep beating that drum until we keep getting more authoritative and snappy openers, but it does come out good. Getting a partial deployment is pretty difficult. You would have to like intentionally stop the blade and not let it go. And then you just flick it open anyway. So our lock is a liner lock. The occlusion on this thing for your thumb to disengage it is pretty good. The liners are pretty dang stout. Stainless steel, I do believe, I'm pretty sure. And the lock feels pretty secure in terms of play. We have minimal side-to-side play. It's pretty solid. I will say that due to, I think, the speed assist and just how much I enjoy flipping this knife open, how much I've been doing it the past couple weeks preparing for this review, the pivot has loosened up a little bit more than I would expect. You might want to add some Loctite of your own. That is a bit of a quality concern. Moving on to our handle, we have a peel ply style of G10, more two-dimensional in contrast to our Kershaw 0200, which is a true 3D machining job. This is the more peel ply stuff that you would find similar to on, oh, I don't know, Spyderco, Resilience, Tenacious Line, the Kershaw Emersons, all that peel ply stuff that you guys know so well. It is a closed design with a backspacer. You see we have a little space there and enough space between the handles that I don't think you'll have a problem. You won't have to like whittle down a Q-tip. You can just use it. Go ahead and pluck any, not grease necessarily, but pocket lint, you know, that sort of thing. Or, I don't know, grease, maybe if you're trying to cut the cannons off of tanks, who knows. The liners, as I mentioned earlier, are some pretty thick stainless steel. I think they add quite a bit of weight, but they are also pretty stylish. I think they look good, and they probably contribute some to the overall strength of the knife, pushing it into that, you know, hard use. The ergonomics, well, with a ZT, it's just always got to be something, doesn't it? You guys remember back in my ZT 0200 review, I talked about how if they had just contoured this little hump here on the handle better, I would like this knife so much more. And similarly, I said in my first impressions video that I liked the ergonomics of this knife best when I was choked back like this. And, you know, as I found myself actually using it to cut things like cardboard or anything that provided any real resistance, I wanted to choke up more and get in that good Filipino grip like I typically do. But we've got this little, stupid, pointless horn here that extends the thumb ramp where it doesn't need to be extended, and it really messes with the ergonomics of pushing your thumb over the top. You have to push your thumb into that little horn of metal. And it's not terrible. I haven't gotten a blister from it. It is certainly a hot spot. I just don't understand why. I really don't, because it doesn't have any additional texture on it when it comes to the jimping. So, I mean, it extends the thumb ramp, but not really functionally. It's just a little extra bit, a couple mils there. And if we had just contoured this differently, I mean, they already put this little swell in for you to put your thumb, so I don't understand why. In fact, if I ever get this knife pimped or modified, I'm going to have that fixed. I'm going to have that sanded out. I could probably do it on my own, but I really enjoy having knives pimped, so there you go. The jimping, let me back you guys back out here, is a pretty large grain jimping. It is not hyper tacky, but it certainly gets the job done. I would say it is in between something like the Spyderco Native, which is still a large grain jimping, but is more sharp and tacky on your thumb. It's in between that and perhaps you guys know the Hogue EX01. That is a legendarily soft jimping. Those edges are very contoured, and it provides traction, but more by pinching your thumb here. Regardless, the jimping on this knife is fine. I would always prefer to go a little bit tackier than this. Reference standards around here, Spyderco Native is one. Actually, ZT-0200 is another. Perfect mixture of tacky and soft enough to not abrade your hand terribly. Here I think we're a little bit on the soft side, but I mean, it keeps your hand from slipping forward and you have that pretty good pinch point with the choil. I don't think your hand's going onto the blade unless something goes catastrophically wrong in a puncture or a really forward pressing cut. I think something's going to have to go really bad, and I think you're pretty secure. You know, because this is the knife that we're going to be using to fight somebody off. I'm being a little bit disingenuous. If this is the knife that you have, it certainly passes my test of, do I want this in my hand or would I rather have nothing? I would take this knife. This just isn't the knife that I would pick to go into any kind of hostile situation, if that makes sense. Kind of harkening back to our intended usage. And we have a little bit of jimping up here too. This jimping I'm definitely okay with being this soft for our reverse grip, and not the best ergonomics for reverse grip, but they're certainly passable. Like I said, I'm being a little bit facetious about billing this knife as a emergency defensive or a hard use knife. I think this knife's real bread and butter comes as a utility cutter knife. I really don't believe that you want to be using a knife this small to be doing your real fighting knife type jobs. That sort of thing would come in more. The smallest knife I would be comfortable with dwarfs this knife. You've got that extra bit of reach. That stuff really matters. Regardless, that is a talk down by competition. So back onto the clip, we have a 4-way reversible clip here. You guys see the previous owner actually polished the paint. I should have had a black clip here, but it is 4-way reversible. It is a relatively simple clip. I don't think it interferes with the ergonomics of the knife at all, probably due to it being exceptionally simple and round and rectangular. Those sorts of things tend to go well. It is a functional, cool clip. It doesn't interfere with anything, and that's a good clip design in my mind. The presentation, well, I think it's cute. I really like my recurves. I think the overall design is pretty cool. It's got a couple of different photogenic angles. I think the back spacer and those nice big liners really set off the handle. I definitely like the stonewash. It's just a good looking knife, in my opinion. The quality is good minus, I said. It's got a subpar edge, and there's that little bit of concern that I talked about with the pivot loosening up quick. I just don't think you can justify on an expensive knife over $100 having this much material behind the edge, having it come with an edge that's not shaving sharp. I really think we should be able to get that onto any knife we're sending out the door for over $100. That being said, it hasn't catastrophically fallen apart. Overall, the finish and everything is nice, so I would say good minus. It's not exceptional, but it's not anything to really bitch and moan about. Moving on to value, well, $108 for S30V is okay. As we start to go into competition, you can get premium steels in other knives for cheaper. The Native 5, I think, would be a better suited knife for most people for your EDC utility cutter tasks. I think this knife, like I said at the beginning of this review, has a real identity crisis. I think ZT wanted to be making overbuilt knives for tactical, hard use, manly men, rah. And so they made, they started off really strong. We've got the 0200, similarly sized 0300, and then they wanted to make something a little bit smaller, a little better suited for EDC utility cutter usage, and they just kind of kept the overbuilt feel anyway, so it is a little bit burdensome to carry in pocket, which is not something that I typically say. I mean, I carry a Raha 2 and other huge cold steels on a pretty daily basis, but for a knife with this small of an edge, this thing is pretty burdensome to carry in pocket. And I think competition is really where this review is going to start to fall apart, or rather come into perspective. There are lots of knives for a similar price that if you wanted an EDC utility cutter, you should go with instead. I would say the Hogue EX01 costs a little bit more and dominates this knife as a utility cutter. It doesn't have any ergonomic issues, just as fun to deploy, and I would even say just as well suited for any kind of harder use. I mean, these are small folding knives. We have to be thinking moderation if we really want to go out and bash our knives through PVC and be going through 2x4s and all those sorts of things. I mean, let's go with fixed blades. Why not? Let's get some big, ugly pieces of steel out there and have some fun. Let's go with stuff like this. If we're talking more practical, I gotta cut some cardboard type stuff. I mean, I have torn down a buttload of cardboard with this knife here, and it did great. I'm still in the testing phase with this knife, but it has handled everything that I have thrown at it. So I think for even tilting towards hard use, for a utility cutter, I think you can do something that's just better suited to that job. That doesn't mean that I don't like this knife. I really do like this knife. I like the feeling of something overbuilt in my pocket, and I really like being able to walk around with, you know, that 3-knife carry we've talked about before, and carry this as my defensive folder. This is my sort of backup for either, and this is my utility cutter. I can wrap my head around that kind of system, but this knife is just not best suited to be a utility cutter. I also don't think that it's best suited to be a defensive knife. I think that if you're really concerned about having to use a knife to defend yourself, you should be looking at a compact fixed blade with a huge blade to handle ratio. I think that's really your bread and butter. Reference the CRKT Dragon. Little itty bitty concealable blade with a wicked edge, and that thing had a small handle. You could really use that thing as a defensive tool. I don't think a folding knife is really your best bet for defensive usage, regardless of how it's designed. And if we are going to use a folding knife for defense, I think it ought to be, to quote Pantera, a vulgar display of power. I think by the time that you're drawing a folding knife to defend yourself, things have gone so wrong that to hell with subtlety, to hell with restraint and moderation and all those sorts of things. Get the job done. Save your ass. I mean, I want an obscenely large blade with an obscenely strong lock if I'm going to be using a damn folding knife to defend myself. Same thing goes with hard use. I would much rather have the Mora knife. I mean, I like this knife. I think it's got good build quality. I think the production value is high. But, I mean, take it out and thump it like we did with our Mora testing video, and I bet it falls apart. And, again, if you had to be doing bushcraft with a folding knife, the triad lock is still kind of the best locking mechanism that I've seen that can put up with that. So, yeah, little bit of an identity crisis, and it really starts coming out when we talk about those competitive options. I think if you're looking for a utility cutter and you want around this size, 2 great options right there. If you're looking for something this size to use as a defensive knife, God, I just don't know. Cold Steel makes stuff this small, but I just can't really endorse thinking about. That being said, if a knife being this much smaller, if downgrading from 0-200 size to 0-350 size keeps the knife in your pocket, this knife is going to be a much better assistance to you in your pocket than this knife will in your car, in your Pelican case at home, all those sorts of things. And if you like a little bit narrower feel, good feel in hand, all those sorts of nice things that we've talked about with the recurve, the overbuilt folder in this small size, if this knife will be in your pocket, then hell yeah, buy it. I just can't recommend this knife for somebody who's trying to think of what blade they should buy to really strike an excellent compromise between being durable and being small and concealable. I just think that the Cold Steel AK-47 wins that battle every day for less money. But then again, look at that extra size, a little bit harder to conceal. I think this knife is more comfortable in pocket, but, you know, there are some people that are attached to that little bit shorter blade length, that little bit shorter overall length. So I guess I'm rambling at this point. The pass-fail is conditional. If you know what you're getting into, if you've had overbuilt knives before, you know, go for it. If you're completing a ZT collection, completely endorse it. It's cool, go for it. If nothing that I've said so far scares you, then go for it. If you're okay with having a knife that's a little bit heavier than you really need, a little bit more cumbersome than you really need, then go for it. If you're looking for the lightest, most sleek and elegant option, I don't really think this is it. I will continue to say that as much as I like recurves, for the average person, they're not going to be a good utility cutter platform. Clip point blade is just going to win that battle every day because we can all sharpen these. Recurve's a little bit different. That being said, I do really like this knife. It's spent a whole lot of time in my pocket, and I wanted this to be a more complex review and not a really negative one. So I'm by no means saying don't buy this knife. I think there's a lot of good things about it. Like I said, if just having a bitchin' little knife is what's going to get you with one out in the world with a knife in your pocket, then yeah, go ahead and do it. But I don't really see it as being the best at anything, and I think it sacrifices what it could have been as a utility cutter by trying to exist in the emergency defensive market and the hard use market where it doesn't really belong. That being said, I will continue to harken back to my original question. Bad guys bearing down on you right now. You can either take the knife out in your pocket and use it to defend yourself, or you can try to defend yourself bare hand. Which do you choose? I'm pulling that knife out and trying to defend myself with it every damn day. It's just that if I'm buying a knife for the same money to try to excel in that situation or to try and go and be offensive with, I want it to look like that. That's just me though. A lot of people will only go this big, completely respect it. As long as it gets you out there with a knife in your pocket, I'm cool with it. Overall answer for pass-fail is highly conditional. We'll finish up with some specs. I realize that is still mislabeled. I'm not fixing it. Overall length 7.75 inches, handle length 4.5, blade length 3.25, blade thickness 1/8, and a weight of 5.8 ounces. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope if you love this blade, I haven't trashed on it too much for you. I hope you enjoyed the more complex discussion. Yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more of the same.